What happens when a man who commands nuclear arsenals and global headlines finds himself silenced, not by diplomacy, not by war, but by the haunting beauty of a single Quranic verse echoing in the night air of Jakarta, Vladimir Putin, a name that conjures images of power, strategy, and control. From the snowy streets of St. Petersburg to the Kremlin's gold-domed halls, he has wielded influence like few others in the modern world. Yet beneath the armor of nationalism and raw leadership lies a man shaped by loss, ideology, and unanswered questions. Born into the secular Soviet era, Putin was baptized as an Orthodox Christian in secret, his mother's quiet act of defiance in an atheistic regime. But faith, for most of his life, was a quiet background hum drowned out by the machinery of state and the cold calculus of politics. Fast forward to 2025. Amid rising tensions with the West and growing efforts to deepen ties with the global South, Putin schedules a state visit to Indonesia. On paper, the trip is a blend of strategic dialogues, trade deals, defense agreements, and regional diplomacy. But what was meant to be a standard political maneuver would soon become something entirely unexpected. Jakarta greeted him like it does all foreign dignitaries, with fanfare and scrutiny. Streets were cordoned off. Banners flew alongside Russian flags. Security was tight. The media focused on his every move, yet amid the choreographed politics, something unplanned slipped through. An influential local religious leader extended an informal invitation to a public Islamic study gathering, a pengajian, in one of Jakarta's largest stadiums. Initially, Putin's aides dismissed the idea as unnecessary. It wasn't on the agenda. There were too many unknowns. Yet Putin curiously insisted. "I want to see how ordinary people here live and believe," he said. "No cameras, no press, just attendance." That night the stadium swelled with tens of thousands. From farmers to engineers, from veiled students to aging scholars, they came to sit shoulder to shoulder. The speaker that night was a well-known Indonesian preacher, not known for fiery rhetoric but for soft-spoken clarity that resonated with both heart and mind. Putin entered the venue quietly. No grand announcement, no disruption. The attendees noticed him, nodded respectfully, and returned to their listening. As he sat, the Quran's verses began to float through the speakers. The Arabic carried no meaning to his mind, but something else, something deeper, wrapped itself around him. He closed his eyes. For a moment, the ceaseless ticking of his internal clock paused. The noise of responsibility, the calculations of leadership, the roar of geopolitical burdens all faded. What remained was silence, punctuated only by the haunting cadence of the sacred text. Something stirred. When the session ended, Putin approached the preacher with soft eyes and a slow step. Through a translator he asked, "What was that recitation? I didn't understand the words, but I felt peace." The preacher smiled gently. "That is the Quran. It doesn't only speak to the mind, it speaks to the soul." That night, back in his hotel, Putin couldn't sleep. He stared out at Jakarta's skyline. The traffic lights blinked below like Morse code in a city alive with faith. He opened his notebook and in firm Cyrillic handwriting wrote, "I want to know more about Islam." The next morning his demeanor had shifted, calm, present, reflective. He requested a private meeting with the preacher again. His aides, confused but compliant, arranged the visit. In a plain room they met. Putin's first question, "Teach me the letters." The Arabic ones, and so began a lesson unlike any other. A man who had once dominated global stages now traced the humble curves of Alif and Ba. The lessons continued in secret. Every morning before the official day's schedule, Putin met quietly with the preacher or his assistant, learning the script, asking questions, and absorbing Islamic concepts, tawhid, mercy, discipline, and submission to God's will. He was not interested in surface-level understanding. He sought depth. He asked about the stories of the prophets, the purpose of prayer, and the meaning of revelation. His notebook, once filled with political bullet points and military strategies, now brimmed with Quranic reflections and Arabic letters, some written awkwardly, some with surprising precision. The transformation, though private, began to seep into his daily routine. He began waking earlier, often before dawn, requesting privacy during those moments. His staff noted how he paused longer before making decisions, often whispering to himself in Russian, perhaps rehearsing verses or contemplating their meaning. A Russian aide once caught sight of him listening intently to a recitation of Surah Maryam. his eyes wet but his face calm, as though some internal conflict had been soothed. During a guided tour of a mosque in Bandung a few days later, he surprised everyone by requesting to stay behind after the press had left. The call to prayer echoed through the halls, and he asked a local imam to explain it. As the imam translated the meaning line by line, "Come to prayer, come to success," Putin repeated the Arabic slowly under his breath. He asked what it meant to bow only to God. The imam answered simply, "It means you fear nothing else." From that moment, something hardened in him began to soften. That night, his security detail was stunned when he refused dinner with a delegation and instead joined a humble meal at a local Islamic boarding school, sitting cross-legged with barefoot students who recited Quran before eating. He didn't speak much, but his eyes scanned everything, the simplicity, the discipline, the sincerity. It was a different kind of power, one he had never known. Then came a night that would stay with him forever. In Yogyakarta, he attended a private recitation session in a small mosque nestled between rice fields and minarets. There, a blind Hafiz, a Quran memorizer, was invited to recite. The verses flowed not just with sound but with weight. Surah al-Fajr. The word struck him with eerie precision. "O reassured soul, return to your Lord, well pleased and pleasing to him. Enter among my righteous servants and enter my paradise." He didn't need a translator for that one. His heart translated it. He closed his eyes again, but this time tears rolled down his cheeks. A man surrounded by security, satellites and advisors, moved to silence by a blind man's voice and a divine message. After the session, he did something unexpected. He asked to speak alone with the Hafiz. They sat on the mosque floor in complete quiet. The preacher who accompanied them would later say, "I did not hear what was said, but I saw a man fall in love, not with a person, but with a truth too big to explain." When he returned to Jakarta for the final leg of his visit, Putin requested one last meeting with the original preacher. There, with no cameras, no journalists, and only his translator present, he asked, "If I were to accept this faith, what would change?" The preacher replied, "Your soul would change first, then your purpose, then your place in the world." Putin stared down for a moment, nodded, and said, "I think it's already begun." The following day, an unannounced detour was made in his itinerary. Instead of the official meetings at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Putin's motorcade veered quietly toward the Istiklal Mosque, the largest in Southeast Asia. It was early, no crowd, no press, just Putin, his translator, a handful of security, and a local imam. The mosque's interior swallowed sound. Its massive dome loomed like a sky within a sky. Putin removed his shoes, walking across the cool marble floor slowly, reverently, tracing the Arabic calligraphy on the walls with his eyes. Each verse was translated for him by the imam. At one point he stopped in front of the wall bearing Surah al-Ikhlas. He read the Russian translation printed beneath, say, "He is Allah, the one and only, Allah, the eternal refuge. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is nothing comparable to him." He stared at the text for several minutes, unmoving. Then he whispered, "This is the answer. This is the key that undoes everything we have misunderstood." That same evening, far from the grand halls and red carpets, Putin visited a modest Islamic boarding school or pesantren in a small village outside of Bogor. There was no protocol, no spectacle, just children in sarongs reciting Quran under the soft glow of hanging lamps. Putin sat on a bamboo bench and watched them with quiet wonder. One young boy, maybe 12, approached and handed him a copy of the Quran with a note. "For our Russian uncle, may Allah open your heart." The boy didn't know who he was, just that he was a guest. That moment shattered something in him. He had spent decades as a man behind iron walls, physical, political, and emotional, but here a child had given him something no Western ally, no Kremlin strategist, no cathedral priest ever had: innocent dawah, a simple invitation to God. Later that night, Putin sat alone on the school's porch. Rain fell softly over the banana trees. The muezzin's voice echoed from a distant minaret, and for the first time in decades he prayed, not formally, not in Arabic, but with his heart. He asked, "If you are there, take me where I need to be." Over the next days, his study intensified. Between state meetings and ceremonies, he carved out silent moments with scholars and imams. He asked about the 5 pillars. He asked why Muslims fast. He asked why Muslims pray 5 times a day when once would seem enough. A scholar replied, "Because we forget God 5 times a day, so we return 5 times a day. It's not about ritual, it's about remembering what matters." Putin nodded, like a soldier returning to base. The scholar smiled. Exactly, except this battle is within. At night he began to dream, vivid, surreal, disarming. In one dream he stood in the middle of Red Square, but it was empty and silent. A crescent moon hovered above the Kremlin, and a voice, gentle, ancient, whispered, "When the truth comes, falsehood vanishes." He woke up breathless. The next day his translator received a request from him. "Translate the full Quran, every verse, every footnote. I want to know it all." The translator asked, "Which chapter do we start with?" Putin replied, "The cave, Surah Al-Kahf. Why that one? Because I feel like I've been in one. Alone, and maybe now I'm coming out." Back in Russia, Putin returned changed. Subtle at first. He spoke less during briefings, asked more questions during intelligence updates. His inner circle noticed his detachment from the usual Orthodox rituals, not out of rejection but transition. He commissioned translations of the Quran in Russian, began building relationships with local Muslim leaders, and created a private study group in the Kremlin focused on Islamic theology and comparative religion. He still played the role of president, but with quieter eyes and a searching heart. This quiet exploration soon found its way into policy. He initiated the construction of new mosques across historically Muslim regions of Russia. Religious tolerance programs were funded. Muslim holidays began to appear on official calendars. At first, critics saw this as a political ploy, but insiders, those closest to him, knew better. He had changed. One night during a confidential late-night meeting, a trusted Muslim advisor was asked to stay behind after others had left. In the dim lamplight, Putin opened the Quran to Surah Al-Ikhlas. He read it aloud slowly in Russian. "Say, He is Allah the One, Allah the Eternal Refuge. He neither begets nor is born, nor is there to him any equivalent." He closed the book. With tears welling in his eyes, he whispered, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulallah." The Shahada, the declaration of faith, no press conference, no public announcement, just a man surrendering to something greater than himself. The revelation did not stay secret for long. Whispers turned to headlines. Analysts scrambled to interpret the implications. Orthodox institutions issued statements. Western pundits labeled it a distraction, a ploy, a charade, but Putin stood firm. He addressed his nation in a televised speech weeks later. "Faith is a personal journey. Mine has brought me peace and clarity that I have never known. I remain committed to Russia, but I now walk with God in a new way." The world was stunned. Russia's Muslim population surged in confidence. Indonesian relations strengthened. Middle Eastern leaders extended open arms. The Vatican responded cautiously. The White House remained silent. Putin's inner circle reshuffled. Some resigned, others adapted. But one thing became clear. The man who once led through fear now led through faith. He began opening dialogue between Orthodox Christian leaders and Muslim scholars. He established cultural exchange centers and personally funded interfaith conferences. He visited mosques across the nation, not as a politician, but as a believer. And then, years later, he returned to Jakarta, the same mosque, the same preacher, the same atmosphere. This time, however, he joined the congregation, not as a visitor, but as a Muslim. He placed his forehead on the ground, whispering prayers in Arabic. The stadium outside, once filled with murmurs of curiosity, now echoed with shared remembrance. Putin was no longer merely a leader, he was a seeker. This story, part truth, part imagination, asks a deeper question. What does it take for a man of immense power to admit he is searching? And when he finds what he's looking for, what becomes of that power? Faith changes people. It dismantles walls built by ego. It softens hearts hardened by politics. It invites humility into places once filled with pride. And if even the most hardened of leaders can be moved by a single verse, then perhaps we all can. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next script.